This is Kick-Ass News. I'm Ben Mathis. Today's episode is brought to you by Kronos. Kronos provides HR solutions for the modern workforce and the people who support, motivate, and engage them. They put HR, payroll, talent, and timekeeping on a single cloud-based platform. Learn more about Kronos HR, payroll, talent, and time at kronos.com/HRswagger. That's kronos.com/HRswagger. Dan Pfeiffer worked for nearly 20 years at the center of Democratic politics, from the campaign trail to Capitol Hill to Barack Obama's White House. But it was Donald Trump's victory and Republicans' incessant aiding and abetting of Trumpism that radicalized his thinking. Now the #1 best-selling author and co-host of Pod Save America urges Democrats to embrace bold solutions in order to defeat Donald Trump in 2020 and overcome the broader threat of Trumpism in the long run. It's all in his new book titled Untrumping America, a plan to make America a democracy again. And today, Dan joins me on the podcast to talk about the resurgence of Joe Biden's campaign, whether Bernie still has a shot at the nomination, and what we can learn from the failed campaign of Michael Bloomberg. He says the Democratic nominee will need to take the gloves off, rewrite the playbook, and focus on attacking Trump where he's strongest if he wants to win. However, Dan says Trumpism won't just die with the ouster of Donald Trump, and we talk about the long-lasting ramifications of the Trump presidency for the Republican Party and the nation as a whole. He recalls witnessing some of the early signs of Trumpism during his own time in the White House, and how he says the Democratic Party was allowed to collapse during the 8 years of Obama's presidency. According to Dan, voter expansion is the key to Democrats' victory in 2020 and beyond. He recommends a host of ideas to grow the voter rolls, from granting statehood to the District of Columbia to enfranchising 16-year-olds, and offers proposals for how to make the office of the president more resilient against corruption and abuse of power in the future. Plus, the right-wing media organization that's more dangerous than Breitbart and bigger than Fox News, the man Dan calls the worst person in American politics, hint, it's not Donald Trump, and Dan lets loose on his favorite punching bag, former Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan. Coming up with Pod Save America's Dan Pfeiffer in just a moment. Dan Pfeiffer is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of Yes, We Still Can and co-host of Pod Save America. One of Barack Obama's longest-serving advisors, he was White House Director of Communications under President Obama from 2009 to 2013 and senior advisor to the president from 2013 to 2015. Now he's out with his new book titled Untrumping America, a plan to make America a democracy again. Dan Pfeiffer, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Well, we're recording this the day after Super Tuesday. Last I checked, I think that there's still some counting going on in California, but as of now, Biden has pulled ahead of Bernie Sanders in the total delegate count. Let me ask you, what do we make of this? Is this now a neck-and-neck race? And looking ahead, who do you think stands to gain the most in the remaining primary states?
Well, I think it is neck and neck, but I think that, stipulating that there's a lot of vote to come in California, but even if it looks like what we imagine, Biden is in a strong position now, which is pretty shocking consider where we thought he was about a week ago.
Yeah,
because the Super Tuesday was both demographically and geographically should have been a very strong day for Bernie Sanders, but sorry, that's a Freudian slip. But Joe Biden performed. Joe Biden would appreciate that Freudian slip, I think. But Joe Biden outperformed even the most optimistic expectations, winning states like Minnesota, Maine, and Texas that Bernie Sanders expected to win. So Sanders has a lot of work to do to be the nominee, and he's going to have to make some changes and grow his coalition.
And Biden was helped by the endorsements of Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg. But one thing that some people were waiting for, which really would have tipped the scales in his favor, was an endorsement from President Obama before Super Tuesday. Obama has certainly made his opinions on Bernie known, but why didn't he just publicly come out for Biden. I mean, isn't it a little bit weird for him to not endorse his own VP?
No, it's actually pretty traditional for the sitting president or the most recent former president to not endorse. He didn't endorse Hillary Clinton in 2016 either.
Right. Okay.
And his view is, and I think, as I understand his view, it is that at the end of this process, the party is going to have to unify. It is the only way we're going to beat Trump, whether that we're either going to have to unify behind Biden or unified behind Bernie. And the person in the party with the best ability to help unify the party is Barack Obama. And if he were to endorse now or put his thumb on the scale in a public way, I think it would reduce his capacity to do so. So as I understand it, he's holding out in order to let the process play itself out, let voters have their say, and then he can work to help put together the coalition it's going to take to beat Trump.
Now, your podcast, Pod Save America, has also taken a neutral stance in the Democratic primary. I'm trying to remember, did you guys endorse in 2016? And was there much debate among you guys about whether or not to do so this time around?
We did not endorse in 2016, but we actually didn't start until we were back in those days. We were keeping it 1600. We were a slightly different podcast, and we didn't even start we didn't start podcasting until pretty late in the primary. Clinton had basically mathematically sealed certainly the pledged delegate lead by then. So we were spending most of our time actually talking about Trump and what was happening in the Republican primary at the time. But, obviously, many of us we knew Secretary Clinton. We had worked with her. John Lovett, had been her speechwriter in the past. So we had relationships there. But it wasn't sort of an issue. This time we decided we discussed it, but there wasn't much debate. We decided that the best way to talk about this primary would be to sort of let it play itself out. And frankly, all of us were a lot like a bunch of like many other Democratic voters, which is we care most passionately about beating Trump, and it's not patently obvious to us which candidate is the best to do that. So we're letting the voters weigh in, and our listeners run the gamut from Warren supporters to Pete supporters to Klobuchar supporters to Bernie to Biden, and so we're trying. Like our view is to try to be neutral, but honest. I'm sure we failed at times, but we wanted to at least. Like neutral in the sense that we weren't going to endorse someone, but be honest when candidates did things we liked, be honest when candidates did things we didn't like. And that always has sometimes that would anger and frustrate our listeners who are supporters of those candidates. And, and sometimes I'm sure we got it wrong, but that was what we tried to do. And hopefully we did it to the best of our ability.
Now, Bernie still has a pretty good chance of running away with this thing. If Bernie wins the nomination, how do the Democrats run an effective campaign against Trump with Sanders at the top of the ticket?
Oh, look, I'm going to be very clear that if Bernie Sanders is the nominee, myself and everyone at Pod Save America will be 100% behind him. We will do what it takes to encourage our listeners who were not feeling the burn to get behind Bernie. We will make the case for why he would do a good job and obviously why he's exponentially better than Trump. I think Bernie can win, and Democrats who say he can't win are ignoring both the data and the lessons of the 2016 election. That doesn't mean he will win. I would say the same thing about Joe Biden, but Bernie Sanders can win. It is incumbent upon the party, if he is a nominee, to unify behind him, because Bernie Sanders with a unified Democratic Party can win. Bernie Sanders with a divided Democratic Party cannot win. And so unity would be critically important, which is one of the reasons why Obama is taking the approach he's taking. Per your previous question.
Yeah, it does feel a little bit like 2016 in the sense that, I don't know, it seems like there's something intangible about Bernie that we can't quite put our finger on, that maybe he could pull it off. Maybe he might surprise everyone. Maybe he might be the secret mix of extreme policies and a little bit kooky that actually pulls it off, kind of like Trump did.
Yeah, well, I think if he's a nominee, that's certainly like the thing that Bernie has going for him are the following in a race against Trump. One is I think he has a very strong economic message that has populist appeal to a lot of the voters that Trump was able to peel off from Clinton. Two, Bernie Sanders is, whether you like him or you dislike him, does not seem to anyone like a typical politician. So it's harder for Trump to paint him as part of some sort of corrupt political establishment.
Sure.
And third, his supporters are very enthusiastic, and that is helpful in terms of organizing, in terms of communicating. And so he has real strengths in that election. He has weaknesses too, for sure. And Trump and the Republicans would look to exploit those, but he certainly can win. He now has, like, we should be pretty clear that he has some very real challenges upcoming in this primary if he wants to be the nominee. And he, like, in every state, he got between 30 and 35% is the ceiling. And he did not perform better than that in any state yet in this primary, while Biden in some states was getting north of 50%. So Bernie Sanders was well positioned to be the nominee in a race with 4 and 5 candidates. In a race with essentially 2 candidates, it gets much more challenging. So he's going to have to figure out very quickly how to grow his support, and particularly among African-American voters who are the most critical constituency within the party.
And I guess now, the day after Super Tuesday, we can actually do a post-mortem on Bloomberg. What do you think about his campaign? I mean, aside from the obvious fact that he spent $500 million to win American Samoa and dropped out a day later, is there anything to be learned from the way that he's been able to get under Trump's skin and kind of tweak Trump where he's most sensitive, especially with the digs at his supposed wealth and business acumen? Isn't Trump weakest when he gets his feathers a little ruffled?
Yeah, there's definitely something about the fact that if Trump is in a Twitter fight with someone, those are, minutes, hours, and days he's not spending making the case for his reelection. And there's a lot of data that shows that sort of these petty fights that Trump gets in are problematic with a lot of swing voters who were sort of just exhausted by the constant drama and wish he would just do his job.
Sure.
And so I think there is like his ability to do that is an asset. I don't think that is a sustainable and singular strategy for winning the presidency. I think ultimately what his failure to do better had a lot more to do with 2 things. One, never a great fit for the Democratic Party electorate, right? This is someone who, despite being a true and legitimate hero on climate change and gun control, was either ambivalent or conservative on almost all the other issues that Democrats cared about, was a frequent critic of President Obama, and critic of the things that Democrats like critic of the ACA. He wanted Obama to cut Social Security. And these are problematic positions for someone running to be the Democratic nominee that $500 million cannot solve. And there was a strategic problem, which was, to have any chance at all, he needed to be in a one-on-one face-off with Sanders, and to sort of make himself this quote-unquote electable alternative. And by skipping the first 4 states, he sort of ensured that he would not be that one person in a one-on-one standoff. And then the final thing is the debate performance in that first debate was disastrous. You can't pitch yourself as this electable alternative if you put in such a bad debate performance. And that, I think, it was a fatal blow to the electability aura that all those television ads had bought him.
Going back to that ability that he had to sort of get under Trump's skin and hit him where many were afraid to hit him, within the Democratic Party, there's been some debate about the effectiveness of the Obama strategy of they go low, we go high, especially when dealing with someone like Trump. A couple of weeks back, I had Rick Wilson on the show, and he was sort of GOP-splaining to the Dems that they need to be ready for a street fight and go after everything from Trump's appearance to his crooked kids. You acknowledge in here that Republicans have what you call the asshole advantage. So how low should your side go in this election?
Well, Rick is a very smart guy, and I really enjoyed his book. I do disagree with him on this approach. It's not a question of low or high. It's just that we have to be very tough with Trump. But we have a different electoral calculus than Republicans, which is sort of where I think Rick's experience comes from. He's trying to get Republicans elected. Republicans win. It's a simple math problem. Republicans win by turning out a base of very committed, enthusiastic voters. And trying to sow enough cynicism that the Democratic base, which involves much more first time and periodic voters, to sow enough cynicism to keep them from coming out. So we can't just be, I call it in the book, a paler shade of orange. That math does not work for us. So we have to be tough with Trump, but it can't just all be about Trump. We have to give people a reason to turn out. And so I don't have any problem with being tough about Trump and saying tough things about him. But if your strategy is just to pick a fight with Trump every day, you're going to lose the election.
And in the last presidential election, it was sort of like Hillary and the Dems were fighting with one hand tied behind their back because they stuck to the generally accepted rules and norms of politics while Trump didn't. How can the nominee overcome this disadvantage this time around? Does he need to play by the rules, break them, rewrite the playbook, or what?
I think it's rewrite the playbook. I think Trump has a very strong ability to make people play his game, to respond to what he says, to draw out the four corners of the conversation and make you talk about the things he wants to talk about, which are things that incite his base and don't do anything to our base. And so what I think the Democrat needs to do is they have to call out the game. They can't get sucked. They can't follow Trump down all these rabbit holes. And that was one of the things that happened to the Democrats in 2016 is every day Trump would do something terrible. We would spend the whole day responding and telling people how terrible that thing was, even if the terribleness of that thing was self-evident to the voters. So I think you have to call out what he's doing and explain why. So when Trump, like in 2018, when Trump sort of fosters this conspiracy about this caravan full of ISIS and MS-13 members coming towards the border to, hurt America, like you don't have to buy the premise of the conversation. You can say that Trump is trying to scare you, and here's what he's trying to distract you from. Here's why he wants to keep us divided. He wants to distract you from the fact that he wants to cut Medicare and Social Security to pay for a tax cut for large corporations. He wants to distract you from the fact that he and his family are getting rich off your taxpayer dollars through his hotels and resorts. He's trying to distract you from the fact that he is making it easier for large corporations to pollute your water and air. And so it is like we have to learn the jujitsu of pivoting instead of letting him tell us what we're going to talk about every day. We can't let Donald Trump write the Democratic talking points every morning.
And to the extent that there is any strategy to what he's doing, he's been very good at anytime he's in trouble with something, anytime he has a scandal or a policy issue that is seriously has the potential to affect him, he's able to throw out something that's just completely batshit crazy, but not particularly consequential, just to change the narrative.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. He has made himself the nation's assignment editor, and we can't play that game.
You advise in here that whoever the nominee is to hit Trump where he is strongest, which has always kind of been one of the basic tenets of political strategy. What do you see as Trump's biggest strengths, and how do you chip away at them this time?
Well, I think there are two primary ones that help him expand his coalition. One is the economy, which creates a permission structure for people who do not like Trump to support him, because they can say, well, he's boorish, he doesn't seem particularly good at his job, but the economy's strong, so why change horses mid-race? That's one. And trade is the other one. Trade is sort of the one where he went against Republican orthodoxy by being an anti-trade America Firster, which is sort of bucking the Chamber of Commerce, Wall Street wing of the party. And on both of those, he is vulnerable. Obviously, just in the 2 weeks since the book came out, the economy has seemed more rocky as the market has been going up and down because of the coronavirus. And so we'll see how that plays itself out. But even in a scenario where the economy stays, it turns out, everything goes right, we get very lucky, coronavirus gets handled, and the economy returns to something like it was, before a few weeks ago, Democrats have an opportunity here. And we have to, I argue Democrats have to reframe the question. If the debate is about whether the economy is quote unquote working, Trump is going to win because the traditional indicators of the economy, like the unemployment rate, are historically good. Democrats have to reframe the question for who is the economy working for. And that the gains of the economy, particularly under Trump and due to his policies like the tax cut, have been most beneficial to corporations and the wealthiest. And we have to, there's an argument to be made there that I think Democrats can make, which goes something along the lines of, under Trump, large corporations have never made more money, paid less in taxes, wages have barely gone up, while the costs of healthcare, energy, housing, college, retirement have skyrocketed. Trump wants to cut Social Security and Medicare to ensure that everyone in America pays more for their Amazon Prime subscription than Amazon pays in federal taxes.
And the big X factor that's emerging right now is the coronavirus in this election. What do you think is the potential impact of that? I mean, nothing ever seems to stick to Trump, but once people start fearing for the safety and health of their families, do you think that that could be the thing that does them in?
I'm hesitant to make any predictions about how these things play out. Like one of the lessons we should definitely take from the last few years of American politics is people have very short memories. So,
Sure.
Impeachment was going to be the biggest thing in the world. Does anybody remember impeachment, even though it ended 3 weeks ago when Trump shut down the government? We thought that would be the most decisive thing ever.
Right.
That got flushed down the memory hole. And so we'll have to see how this plays itself out. This is obviously the first true crisis Trump has faced, not of his making. And if they mishandle it, it can have real political consequences, but it's too early to say what that's going to mean. And I do there is this question of, does nothing stick to Trump or does everything stick to Trump?
Right.
And it may be that everything sticks to Trump because ultimately his approval ratings are really mediocre for someone who is presiding over what is on its face a very strong economy. He currently, things can change, but he's currently under his win number in all the states he needs to win in all the swing states. And so the idea that Ukraine, impeachment, how mishandling the coronavirus, just being a general numbskull has not impacted his political prospects is, I think, not necessarily correct. And that there are things pushing down on, the model would be a normal president with this economy would be cruising re-election. And Trump is not cruising to re-election, even if he has advantages as we head towards one.
Let me ask you this, Dan. What do you think is the biggest thing that Democrats misunderstand about the Republican Party under Trump?
I think we think that Donald Trump took the Republican Party hostage, that once Trump leaves, they will have an epiphany and go back to normal. And Donald Trump is not an aberration. He's the logical extension of the Republican Party. The party has been on this inexorable path towards a white nationalist, racial grievance, authoritarian president since essentially Richard Nixon and the Republicans adopted the Southern strategy after the passage of the Civil Rights Act. And so this is where we are. The next Republican president will be probably a smarter, less profane version of Trump, but will be a Trumpist for sure.
We're going to take a quick break, and then I'll be back with more when we come back in just a minute. And there have been a number of books over the past months about defeating Trump, but they almost seem to assume, like you said, that defeating Trump sort of solves the problem. You, on the other hand, dedicate much of this book to defeating Trumpism. Is it a situation where you just have to keep winning elections until they're just no longer viable? Or are you hoping that there'll be some kind of a come to Jesus moment when the GOP cleanses itself? Or is that just wishful thinking?
Well, I think you have to change the political incentives for the GOP, right? Ultimately, I wrote this book because I believe that there's nothing more important than beating Trump, but beating Trump is not enough. And the Republicans can win the White House, they can control the Senate, they can control the courts in a world in which democracy, as we commonly understand it, is restricted. It's restricted through the geographic biases of the Senate and the Electoral College, but also through a very explicit strategy of voter suppression, gerrymandering, rigging the courts. And if we don't take on those structural impediments to progressive power, then Republicans can see this way. The way to get Republicans to act differently is to create a political structure whereby Republicans have to appeal to the majority of Americans to succeed. Right now, they do not have to do that. They can get by with just appealing to a distinct minority of Americans. And if they had to have a broadly appealing agenda, then Trumpism wouldn't work. Trumpism only works in a rigged political system. And so you have to unrig it if you want to get rid of Trumpism.
And we were just talking about how many still want to believe that Trump is an anomaly in politics, but you contend in here that Trumpism, as you said, has been around for a while in one shape or a form. And you actually recall witnessing the early signs of what would eventually come to be known as Trumpism in your dealings with Republicans in the House and Senate during the Obama administration. Can you give us some examples of that?
Sure. I think the best example also involves Trump, which is, as everyone famously or infamously knows, Trump spent much of the year 2011 pushing this false racist conspiracy theory that Barack Obama was born in Kenya and therefore ineligible to be president, that he had faked his birth certificate, blah, 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 blah. And at the time, we kept waiting for Republicans. Like, Trump was not a Republican leader then. He was a reality. He was a clown. He was just he was a clown famous for being famous. And we sort of were waiting for Republicans to rebuke Trump for this, because this would be an easy way to demonstrate to voters in the quote unquote middle that that the party was not beholden to its most extreme elements. But they never did. They basically just stayed silent the whole time. And then even after Trump sort of got made a fool of by Obama and was sort of laughed off the stage in 2011, did Republicans say, phew, thank goodness Barack Obama solved this Trump problem for us? No. They immediately began begging him for his endorsement if they were running for president in 2012.
Right.
And Mitt Romney, who is now obviously a hero of the Never Trump resistance movement, basically got on one knee and begged Donald Trump for his endorsement. And when Donald Trump gave it to him, they did a event together that looked a lot like the Celebrity Apprentice. And ultimately what that said was Republicans, Mitt Romney wanted Donald Trump's endorsement, not despite the fact that Donald Trump was a racist, but because he was a racist, because it sent a signal about the kind of Republican he would be. And that, I think, is for all the positive things, for Mitt Romney's brave stance on impeachment, he believed that the path to winning the presidency was mobilizing racists, which is why he needed Donald Trump on his side. It's why he needed Steve King on his side and begged Steve King for his endorsement.
Yeah.
And that political calculus existed in 2011, 2012, and is even more true today as the country has gotten more diverse. Republicans have needed to get more out of their diminishing white base.
Mm-hmm. And yet, sort of surprisingly, you bestow the mantle of worst person in American politics not on Donald Trump, but on Mitch McConnell. Why does he deserve that title?
Well, because Mitch McConnell was the person most responsible for someone like Donald Trump becoming president. Mitch McConnell has from the very beginning been an anti-democratic politician, and that he's smart. Donald Trump is not smart. Mitch McConnell is smart.
Yeah.
And he has seen where this is going for a very long time, and that the only way Republicans could hold on to power was to change politics and restrict the political power of communities of color, of young people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so he created an environment where Donald Trump could become president, and has done everything he can to ensure that Donald Trump stays president despite obvious crimes. And I talk in the book about how Mitch McConnell even refused to join, not just with the Obama administration, but the Obama administration and Paul Ryan, to make a public statement about Russian interference, because he knew it would help Donald Trump get elected, and therefore, or at least help Donald Trump do well in the election, and therefore help his Republican senators win election and help him stay Senate Majority Leader.
And of course, we'll get to your feelings on Paul Ryan in just a bit. You certainly have some strong opinions on him. But first, let's talk about the Democratic Party organization. As it stands right now, is the DNC equally or better prepared than the RNC for 2020?
No, they're definitely not better prepared. But that is also a product of being the party out of power, right? Donald Trump filed for re-election 5 hours after he was inaugurated, and they have been working and preparing for this in a singular fashion without having to worry about a primary for 3+ years now. I would say the DNC at this point in 2020 is much better prepared than it was at this point in 2016, and has done a very good job. But the Republicans are better funded, better organized, with a serious institutional and infrastructure head start.
And you actually admit that the party all but collapsed during the Obama administration. How did that happen? Where did the Democratic Party come up short during the Obama era?
Well, I think we tend in politics to assign too much importance to tactical and strategic decisions and not enough to larger demographic and cultural factors. And so several things happened, some of which were in Obama's control and most of which weren't. One, the 2010 midterms was the most important election because it was the decennial election, which means it's the one that happens after the census, which means the people elected in that election get to draw the district lines. And Republicans won because they always do well in the first election. The out party always does well in the first election after a president's elected, just like the Democrats did in 2018. It also happened to be, 2 years after a very unpopular bailout of the banks that began under the Bush administration. Unemployment was near 10%. And then to make things even harder, the Supreme Court ruled for the plaintiffs in Citizens United, allowing the Republicans who have more money to massively outspend the Democrats on the stretch. And so we lost that election. The same thing that happened at the same time America was undergoing the post-Obama shift, where a lot of we had a lot of more conservative Democrats in southern state in very Republican districts that, as the country polarized, particularly on racial lines in the Republican Party, we lost those. What I think is a fair thing to say about all of us who worked in the Obama administration is that we did not do enough after that election to focus on building political power up at the state level, which would have allowed us to undo some of the gerrymandering and voter suppression Republicans put in place in 2010, post 2010. And I think we were probably overly complacent heading into 2016 about the possibility that Trump would win, and therefore sort of didn't fully comprehend how close the elections were, what actually was in 2012, and that I don't think there was a failure of imagination on the fact that Trump could beat Hillary, and therefore we did not do some things that would protect against that possibility.
And in many respects, the battle between the Republicans and Democrats is a battle between voter suppression and voter expansion. Now, Stacey Abrams in Georgia has done a great job of raising awareness of this issue, but to some extent, she may be the exception. It seems to me that all too often Democrats have been hesitant to talk about voter expansion. Do you know why that is?
It's one of the reasons why I wrote the book, because I think Democrats are reticent to talk about and do things that explicitly expand our political power. Republicans view political power as a means to Democrats view political power as a means to a policy end, and Republicans view political power as an end in of itself. And so we're very hesitant to do things. We have been in the past very hesitant to do things that we believe are right, but also benefit us politically. But that is changing. Like, that is definitely changing. And you're seeing that as more and more states are enfranchising formerly incarcerated individuals who've paid their debt to society. You're seeing that as, nearly every state that has Democratic control has put in place automatic voter registration, and are doing things to expand early vote and enact vote by mail. So we're doing things, but we have to be much more aggressive, and we have to be more strategic about how we do it.
And one of the suggestions you have in here is that you say that you'd like to lower the voting age to 16. Let me ask you this.
Yes.
Do you trust the judgment of a 16-year-old, or would you trust the judgment of a 16-year-old Dan Pfeiffer?
Yes, I would trust. I was a very mature 16-year-old. I mean, look, okay. There are some ideas I put in the book that I don't think are in danger of happening right now, but I wanted to put in there because I think it's important that we be aggressive, and we have the potential to shift the Overton window on what is possible in the context of democratic reform. I think there's the argument for 16-year-olds voting is very similar to the argument for 18-year-olds voting when we lowered the voting age a few decades ago, which is the issues that are most important now, most notably climate change, have real impact on younger people. And we should be engaged, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, you should theoretically want as many people in our process to engage in our process as possible. And if you get people voting at 16, they're more likely to vote at 18, 20, 22, et cetera. And I certainly trust 16-year-old me or a bunch of 16-year-olds out there more than a lot of other people who are much older than 16. And so we don't have a maturity test on voting. But if we think you're old enough to drive a 2-ton vehicle or however much a car weighs on the streets, then you can probably make an educated decision on who should lead the country or lead your state or lead your town.
And you also call for D.C. and Puerto Rico to be given statehood. I wonder, why didn't Obama make a push to give D.C. statehood when he had a Democratic majority in the Senate and the House? Was there a window where he might have been able to pull that off?
That is a fair question. And I think, and as I talk about in the book, it wasn't even a thing that was even really discussed, even though Obama and most of the Democrats supported it. I imagine that if we had pushed for it, the 50, we briefly had 60 senators, but for most of that first 2 years, we had 59, which is, you need 60 to pass something under current constructs, which we should change. But I imagine, that's 59 or 60, depending on the month, was a quite conservative 60. You have Joe Lieberman in there. You have Ben Nelson. You have 2 senators from Arkansas, a senator from Alaska, a senator from Louisiana. And so I think I don't know whether it could have worked, but we should have tried. And absolutely. It is now. Barack Obama was a supporter of it in his 2008 campaign. It was a part of the platform in 2016. Everyone running for president supports it. It's insane that D.C. is not a state. I think for Puerto Rico, my view has always been that's up to the people of Puerto Rico. If they choose statehood through whatever means they come to that decision, then we should make them a state. If they choose staying the way they are, that is up to them. If they choose to become independent, we should grant them that. We should give them, they should have autonomy in this decision. And just to give you a sense of how absurd the Puerto Rico thing is the people of Puerto Rico are American citizens. A person in Puerto Rico has no say in who's president. If that person moves to, I don't know, say Florida, and lives there long enough to establish residency, which is like 3 weeks, then they can vote for president. So that just makes no sense. We should, at least make them part of the electoral college like DC is. And if they want to be a state, they should be a state.
Yeah. And isn't there something where someone from Puerto Rico can run for president, but not vote for president?
Yeah, they are eligible to be president, but they could not vote for themselves. Yes, that is correct.
Ironic. One of the most interesting parts of this book is your chapter where you talk about the conservative media, and you give time to Breitbart and Fox News, all the usual characters, but you also make a particular point to sound the alarm against one group that doesn't really get much attention. In fact, I'd imagine that most of the people listening right now don't even know Sinclair Media Group. Why are they so dangerous?
Sinclair Media Group is a large conservative-owned media company that has been buying up local televisions and then taking the local news and making it much more conservative, and even hiring some former Trump aides to appear as on-air contributors, and sending like there's if you are a Sinclair station, to date at least, the history has been that they give you one national package you're supposed to air every day or every week that is basically could be coming directly from the White House. And the reason why I think Sinclair is dangerous is I think Fox, Breitbart, all these people are very dangerous and very radicalizing, but there is sort of an opt-in nature to it, right? You kind of know that what you're getting when you go there, right? Right. Sinclair, you're just turning on the same TV station you've been turning on your entire life to watch the 6 o'clock news, 11 o'clock news. And you have this assumption that it is traditional news, right? I don't like to use the term objective necessarily, but it's traditional news and isn't pushing a specific ideological viewpoint, and they are sneaking that propaganda in through customs. And we should be Sinclair has bigger ambitions than just the stations it owns. They've tried to buy Tribune Broadcasting, which would make them the largest controller of local TV stations. They're buying up regional sports networks where they have the potential to do the same thing. And so this is very dangerous under the radar effort to radicalize Americans with right-wing propaganda. And we have to call it out and then bring attention to it, and even use the powers of the FCC when we're in the White House to examine exactly what they're doing and make sure that it adheres to the law.
Well, the final step in this book is you say that we need to protect the country against a future Donald Trump. If, God forbid, another Donald Trump-like figure does get elected, how can we bolster our democracy so that this person won't be able to abuse his power in office and undermine our institutions to the degree that Donald Trump has?
Right. I think that too much, Donald Trump has sort of shown a light on the fact that much of the American political system is based on some faulty ideas. One, that it is dependent upon two parties who both operate in good faith, even if they disagree on the issues. A lot of things that it depends on norms and traditions as opposed to laws and rules. And so, to give you some examples, the conflict of interest rules that prevent regular members of the federal government from having a financial interest in the things they rule on do not apply to the president. And that hasn't been a problem to date because presidents have divested from their financial interests. Jimmy Carter famously put his peanut farm in a blind trust, so there would be no questions about whether he was making pro-peanut policy decisions. But Donald Trump did not do that, has not done that, and there is no law stopping him. Every presidential candidate since Nixon has released their taxes because that has been a tradition, and there's been a belief that political pressure from the public forces you to do it. Donald Trump has not released his tax returns. The laws that prevent you from using taxpayer resources to campaign for federal office do not apply to the president. And therefore, when Donald Trump uses an official speech that all of us paid for the fuel for Air Force One and the and the bunting on the stage, when he uses that to campaign for re-election, there's nothing we can do about it. And so, and I think, and then fundamentally, just we have to recognize that even before Trump, there has been this nonstop accrual of presidential power, and it's in part Congress's fault, because Congress has been willing to kick the hard decisions and the politically precarious ones to the president, and this is a bipartisan problem. And so, my view is that Democrats have to take our norms and traditions and make them laws, and we have to take steps to curb the ability of a president to operate without checks and balances, which is what Trump currently does. And he is refusing to respond to subpoenas, and he's getting away with it. And there should be accountability and rules and laws that make that less likely. And I think it's very important for a Democratic president with a Democratic Congress to be the ones who put these rules into place, because if we don't do it, no one's going to do it. And I actually think it'd be good politics to be a president who would actively look to curb their own power. Because if we decry all of Trump's imperialism, his authoritarianism, his flaunting of the rules, and then we don't do something about it when we have power, because it may make our life harder, then we're going to sow a lot of cynicism in the electorate in a way in which that will be electorally detrimental to Democrats in a way that it has not been for Republicans.
Some good advice. Well, before we go, you throw in a bonus chapter in your book that's sort of an extended rant on Paul Ryan. Now, I've heard you go off on him on Pod Save America before, and even though he's gone back to Wisconsin and probably out of politics for good, you still seem to have this very visceral reaction to him. Let me ask you, of all the whole rogues gallery of crooks and enablers around Trump, what is it about Paul Ryan? Is it the workout photos or what? Why does he drive you crazy?
It is not the workout photos, although those are very cheesy. I mean, look, I do not, if someone wants to pick another least favorite person in Republican Party to go after, like, I cannot disagree with you. You say you hate Marco Rubio or Devin Nunes or Jared Kushner or Steve, like those are all pretty legitimate choices. Paul Ryan bothers me the most because Paul Ryan is the hero of this story in his own mind, and he is operating on a different plane from reality, and so he has annoyed me for years. His behavior in the Trump administration is inexcusable. I do not believe he's done with politics. I think he is going to be running for governor of Wisconsin or senator in Wisconsin in our near future. I think we are not done with Paul Ryan. He's just taking a break to try to make some money and try to cleanse the stain of Trumpism off his soul, which the point of this chapter is that maybe in some small way keep him from doing. And the funny thing about this chapter is when I was writing this book, I was trying to maximize, I do a lot of obviously travel for Pod Save America. We have a lot of long flights. And so I try to maximize all of them, because that's like 5 hours, for flying across country that I can just work and no one's supposed to bother me. And I was stuck on a flight and I was writer's block. Like, I just could not put words on a paper. And I was feeling the pressure of, like, with every minute, this is another minute I'm not going to get back of my incredibly important flight time to get some sort of I'm on like a, you got to turn this book in, you're on like on a word schedule, right? Like if I don't write X number of words this week, I'm going to be behind. That means I got to write X plus Y next week, right? Or whatever. And so in order to sort of open the spigots, I just started writing Paul Ryan rant because it came most naturally. And ultimately, when we finished the book, it didn't really fit anywhere. It didn't work in the context of the book. And so it just felt wrong to throw it away. So we just stuck it at the end, which is sort of like a bonus. It's like an after credit sequence in a Marvel movie for the listeners, the readers of the book who are Pod Save America listeners who appreciate the Paul Ryan maybe they appreciate the Paul Ryan rants and miss them because they come less frequently now that he has slunk off the national stage.
Yeah, I found it very rewarding personally, so I'm glad you.
Oh, good. Well, then mission accomplished. Excellent.
Well, again, the book is called Untrumping America: A Plan to Make America a Democracy Again. Dan Pfeiffer, thanks so much for talking with me.
Absolutely, thank you.
Thanks again to Dan Pfeiffer for joining me on the podcast. Order his new book, Untrumping America: A Plan to Make America a Democracy Again, on Amazon, Audible, or wherever books are sold. Listen and subscribe to Dan's podcast, Pod Save America, on Apple Podcasts or wherever you like to listen, and follow him on Twitter at Dan Pfeiffer. Today's episode is brought to you by Kronos. Kronos provides HR solutions for the modern workforce and the people who support, motivate, and engage them. They put HR, payroll, talent, and timekeeping on a single cloud-based platform. Learn more about Kronos HR, payroll, talent, and time at kronos.com/HRswagger. That's kronos.com/HRswagger. If you enjoyed today's podcast, be sure to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and rate and review us while you're there. 5-star ratings and detailed reviews are one of the best ways for new listeners to discover the show. You can also follow us on Facebook or on Twitter at @KickassNewsPod and recommend us to your friends on your social media. For more fun stuff, visit kickassnews.com, and I welcome your comments, questions, and suggestions at comments@kickassnews.com. For now, I'm Ben Mathis, and thanks for listening to Kick-Ass News.